Okay, it looks like people are semi-ready at least. And I'm very happy to introduce Sebastian Long, who is the managing director of player research. He has over 10 years of experience in game UX and especially games user research. And he personally has worked on over 200 titles. So he has a lot of knowledge to drop on us today.
I'll try.
Yes. We'll start with a very obvious one. Um, what brought you to game UX?
Okay, thanks. Hi, folks. Lovely, pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. Um, Look, so I had maybe a journey similar to other folks where I learned about user experience as a concept first, that we have to consider the nature of our actual users, our customers, in the design of something. That if we don't consider the customer's holistic impression of the product we're making, it's going to be terrible in some imaginable way. And then at the same time as being a massive gamer, all the way through my childhood, and suddenly these two frontiers converged, and I realized that games user experience was a thing, and that we should consider the actual player experience, or that, let's say, the actual player experience that happens if you put a player in front of a video game might be different to what the designer imagined. And so we should close that gap by using player data, player feedback. So yeah, it's always been, they've both been passions about user experience in general, good customer design, good product design, and video games. And this is just the perfect intersection of the two.
That's very lovely because we have very different people with different backgrounds already from our lightning talks and later in the panel. So that's why I wanted to sort of set the stage of where you're coming from.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but like I said, you worked on many, many different titles. And if you built all of them, you wouldn't have had time to do that. So, a little bit about player research, you focus on the research part of games. And from my understanding, but not everyone here understands that you come in to a project and work on that for a little bit and then sort of drop
Yeah,
out, right?
yeah, that's right. So Player Research is an agency. We started it in 2012. So we've been going for a long time now, it feels like, especially in games industry years, which feel like they're slightly different to everybody else's calendar years. Um, And yeah, we're an agency. We provide research services to the games industry at large. So it's a great luxury to have user experience professionals like the folks that have already talked, and there's folks here. It's a great luxury to have those folks, but not all teams can afford them. Certainly, they can't afford them to be full time. And so it makes sense for an agency or a third party or somehow like rent a researcher in some form. And so that's the gap that Player Research fills. We work with with all kinds of teams of all sizes, from literally one man bands where they've just got one developer making the title, all that through the biggest games that have ever been made. And they all have differing needs for just research. Provide us it quickly, provide us it discreetly, provide us it securely. They've all got different requirements for player data to be added to their development process. So that's where player research sits. We don't work with just one team. Have worked with very many hundreds of teams of all sizes. And yeah, we usually we can do as little as one touch point. It'll be, I need a play test tomorrow, and off we go. We deliver a report or deliver some findings, and maybe we don't see that team again until the next game, all the way through to really engaging with game teams over the long term, multi-year, maybe even multi-product, multi-title, longer term relationships. So a little bit of everything. When Player Research was started, it was very much just usability testing. Talked a little bit about that earlier with your UX 101. Really just, do players understand the rules? And 15 years later, whilst we're still doing that work, it's now multi-country, multi-platform, multi-title for games that are decades old, and running lots and lots of research. So yeah.
Thank you. That was very thorough. And that's a great segue to another question that I had. Um, like sometimes people feel that, let's just do UX at the end. We'll call an agency and they'll just check the menus and it's fine. And then we'll release the game. Is there a typical time when your team comes in and joins a project? And is it aligned with what you think is the ideal time? Or is there it varies a lot? Like you said, there are different projects.
Yeah, it massively varies. So broadly speaking, there's like, I'll call them front foot and back foot. So there are teams that are on the back foot, which is to say that they are reacting to something they didn't expect. Maybe the stakeholder, they decided they don't like a feature, or the game isn't making enough money, or the boss's kids played the game and they didn't have a good time, so now we need to rethink everything. Or there's some inflection point that just says something's not right, and we think we need either a bit of data or a third party or some other voice in the boardroom to help fix it. And so player research is on the other end of the telephone, right? We need some player data help. So that's a bit more on the back foot. Very happy to help with those situations, you know, sort of hair on fire moments where we need to change. When we've worked with teams like that, or there are teams that are just more mature, they want more player data-driven approaches, they usually end up on the front foot somehow, right? They're more proactive. So they know that these mistakes can happen, or that they already have some innate fear that they're making something that's not as good as they'd like it to be, or they want some process that checks that as they're going along that this is a high quality thing, you know, it's the best possible thing we could be making. And we'll call that front foot, right? Being proactive about the data that they're generating. So look, play research, you know, our website and our telephone number, we just don't know who's going to be on the other end of the phone. You know, it can be completely wild requests sometimes, but it's usually either front-footed, we'd love to change the way we make games, we want to be proactive and invest in this, or it's reactive, something's gone wrong, help, please help, and can it be yesterday? I didn't answer the second part of your question, which is when ideally should this happen? Look, well, the best time to realize you're making a mistake is yesterday, and the second best time is right now. And so the question is really, you know, how do we react to the idea that we might be making a mistake? Do we want to invest in it and try and do, you know, a play test tomorrow, get some user data tomorrow, you know, get some quantitative data tomorrow? Ideally, that could be done, and maybe we can talk through some methods and different approaches that user research uses. That can be done from a very, very early stage. Right? It's absolutely possible, I've done it, to run user research on a GDD, right, a game design document, or on competitor titles before you've written a single line of code. Right? What is great about Fortnite so that we can try and beat it there, making Fortnite 2 or, you know, or whatever. And so it's theoretically possible to start on day 0, but most folks, you know, especially the first time they do it, they realistically are going to wait until quite late in the development process, or 2 minutes to midnight when there's not a lot of time to change things. And that's just the nature of game dev. Everyone, you know, they want to rush to the finish and get things implemented and finished as quick as possible.
Yeah, but it sounds very exciting that you have done research, obviously, towards the very end when it's like 2 minutes to midnight, and basically, well, we can't change that, so maybe we just add a pop-up and call it a day. Or you mentioned running competitor analysis and research, and also running research on just a game design document. That's very exciting, and we should talk about the methods. But I think what is very interesting to a lot of people here, and one that gets people excited and hopeful, is that you've seen a lot of games and you've seen a lot of these different mistakes. So can you name any common ones and how to avoid them?
Yeah, sure.
Outside from do research earlier.
Yeah, of course. Can I borrow from your I don't know, whatever slide, 3rd or 4th slide from your talk earlier, which was about thinking, doing, and feeling, right? So there are, essentially our first mistake is that the thing we're making is going to play out in players' minds exactly as it plays out in mine. I'm the designer in this case. The first mistake would be just simply having a little bit too much confidence that the final user experience is going to be exactly how I imagine it. When I close my eyes and I imagine the player playing through this masterpiece I've created, that final user that buys it or plays the demo is going to have that exact same experience and love it, right? That is very unlikely to happen unless you've been through this process of putting it in front of real people and seeing where the splinters are, where the problems are, where their experience is dissonant. So the first mistake is just hold a little bit of room for the fact that your game isn't perfect, right? And the teams that are too overconfident with that find out the hard way that that's not true. Against your 3 categories, though, there are mistakes that teams make or oversights against all 3 of these. So the first you had thinking, which is about telling the player the rules, right? Your game probably has very complex rules or complicated things. Your game inherently needs to be novel. It has to do something that no other game has done. Otherwise, you're just cloning another game, or there's nothing novel about it. Players won't buy it. Over to our marketer. Players won't buy it because it's nothing unique. So a game has an inherent need to teach the player the novel things quickly, and teams tend, because they know themselves the rules, you know your rules that you've designed, that they think that will be easy, or it'll just be a tutorial pop-up, or that players only need to hear it once and they'll internalize it and be able to, to demonstrate what you've taught them. Reality is that players as humans are extremely fallible. They've got terrible memories. They don't tend to read things, and there's a good chance that they'll forget. If they don't forget immediately, they'll definitely forget by the next day or the next week when they next pick up the game. The truth is that players as humans, we all need a great deal more support than we colloquialize and recognize. and that tutorials as a means to that, so tutorials for the non-game dev among you, is the idea that you really front load right at the beginning in the first session of play everything you think the player needs to know and make them go through a little dance where they pretend to know and demonstrate by jumping and hitting things that they can do it. Tutorials are seen as a sort of fix-all or one-size-fits-all solution to teaching players how to play, and they objectively do not work. Right? They do not work, and you should trust them at no more than at least 10% of the way you currently do. Right? They are 90% ineffective, let's say. Don't quote me on that. So there's a stack of problems in just telling the players what to do, and you should trust less that players are machines that can read and remember, and view them more as fallible, squishy humans that are prone to forgetting or not understanding. I didn't even go into the idea that they might be playing in their second or third language, for example. We talked a little bit about growth audiences earlier from our marketer, wherever they are, that there are just groups of people who love to play the game, right? And that can include folks that are in different countries and geographies than you are able to market to directly, for example. All right, I'll try and do the rest quicker. The second one about doing. So this, again, is a very human thing. Just the simple outright complexity of expressing the controls. Okay, Emma's demonstrating her lovely baby hands here, right? It is the case that it's just very complicated to input information into a game and for a game to pass that information over to our lovely VR speaker earlier. And the truth is, just doing things in a game, executing the tasks that you want the player to do, can be too taxing. And you don't know that because you've spent the last months and years doing it every single day until you're the best player in the world at your own game. And so that huge gap between your skill level and the player's skill level needs to be addressed with research. And that's purely a muscle memory thing or just a simple capability of execution thing. And lastly, in feeling, okay, so you didn't talk about it, but there's actually, there's a ladder here, which I'll go through maybe last. But the truth is that players are very different to you. And whilst you, in terms of how they feel, what they enjoy, right? They're a much more diverse rainbow of people than you, like scaled up, right? There was a beautiful slide earlier with lots of different types of people who respond to different types of fun. And the truth is that players want a much more difficult experience than you like, a much easier experience than you like, a much slower experience than you like, a much faster experience than you like. They're different to you. And the only way to really meaningfully close that gap is with player data, by getting those real diverse groups in front of the product, in front of the thing you're making, and seeing where their experience differs to yours. Not just in what they think, not just in what they do, but also in how they feel. Lastly then, there's a ladder here. There's an order of operations. Because no one's going to have any fun in your game if they can't perform in it, right? If they can't jump, they're not going to have fun jumping. And they also, if they don't, even if they could, they're certainly not going to, even if they know they can, the baseline is, do they even know they can jump at all? Jumping is a bad example. Every game has jumping, right? But if they don't know, they can't do. And if they can't do, they can't have fun. And so there's an order of operations here. We should examine first whether or not players understand, and then whether they can execute, and only then whether they're having fun. Well, that was a long answer to your question. But I did have to talk about every game genre possible and all audiences possible.
And all the problems.
And all the problems I've ever seen. Yeah.
But this is why I wanted to have a fireside chat with you, because you fill the time and I can just ask a question and you talk for ages.
Go on and on, thanks.
But you did a very good job and sort of legitimized my talk. So thank you very much for that. But that was a very good breakdown of, okay, these are the things that you need to make sure that happen in order for the player to, first of all, play your game, and second of all, to enjoy and keep playing your game.
Yeah.
So you mentioned those methods earlier. Do you have any go-to methods that people can pick up? Or if they're difficult, like what sort of methods should they use for all of these? And then what are methods that they can use themselves, and where do they need help? What kind of help?
Lovely. Okay, thanks. So two main methods here then. So by methods, we mean just like broad, reasonably structured approaches. You could call them operations, something like that. They're just broad sort of categories of things you can do. A survey is a method, for example. Observing someone play your game and not telling them what to do, just watching what they do is a method. So there's two methods that broadly capture this, and they're the most common methods in games user research. The first of those is usability testing, and the second is experiential testing. Right, so usability testing, hopefully Googleable, so you can Google it later for more instructions, is all about testing whether or not players can think and do. So the first two items of Emma's list of 3 things to get to success. And experiential testing, the clue is in the name, it's all about the experience of play. So that is all about the emotion. It's just that bottom layer that Emma had earlier. So usability testing, in its most simple form, is find a player that doesn't know anything about your video game. And you don't know them, right? So they don't love you. They will tell you if it's terrible, either through their actions or words. And put them in front of your unfinished thing and watch what they do. Tell them absolutely nothing and watch what they do. Then hopefully they do the good thing, right? They find the fun by doing all the fun things, all the jumping and the slashing and the swords, right? They slash the swords in the correct direction. But if they don't, then you delicately approach asking them, what did you do in this game? Why did you do it that way? What led to this behavior? Or what led you to do it like that? Did you ever see a shield icon? What did that mean, right? We're probing gently without giving away any information about the product at all, even though you know all the answers. And just seeing if the player can elaborate what it is that they should be doing and what it is they should be thinking, and providing some color to their actions you've just watched them do. With this simple process alone, you can solve a myriad of challenges, and there are so many very, very mature and best-selling products that still could really benefit from this process. So there is no greater single tool that will get your game to be so much better from an experiential perspective than just putting someone naive in front of it and saying absolutely nothing and watching what they do. When you've done that and you're sure that the player is getting to the fun, they can do the fun thing and they can think the fun thoughts, then we're getting to the fun part, which is just like a usability test, except much bigger. Earlier, we had a description of objective data, which was about facts and figures generated through telemetry, right? Measuring the things that the player's doing in the game. Anything about experience is going to be subjective, right? It's much more about players' thoughts and feelings. It's what's in their heart. And inherently, because there's so many differences between people, you can imagine just even in this room, the vast number of differences between your subjective impressions of any given game. We need a larger number of people to be sure that the data we're getting is worth listening to. Now, we could talk easily for an hour, and we won't, about what's called sample sizing, or the number of people you need to speak to. We won't go down that path. But let's say around 30 alike people would give you data that I would stand behind, right? At least 30. And they're not randos, pulled from the street. They're not your mum. They're not, they're not someone that loves you. They're genuinely customers, and they're, having a relatively controlled experience in an experiential playtest. Again, hopefully a Googleable term that you can look up later. But the experience is the same. Get those folks in front of the game. Let them play unaided. Ideally, give them a survey, something like, how did you find this game? An unleading question. And then looking for trends across those 30 people and garnering whether or not the experience of the game that you imagine is manifest in these lovely, unsuspecting members of the public.
Those are very good answers. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I can just throw a very general question and you deliver. Thank you. This was very thorough, but there's one talk that that touched on player motivation, and you haven't mentioned that in this list of methods at all. Have you investigated player motivations, and in what sort of situations, how and why?
Okay, good. So I don't personally prescribe. It was great to have a list of multiple motivation models on the wall here earlier, because there are multiple ways to break down who players are, right? And there's no one lancing perfect answer that says all players are like this. And even if there were, the creators of this room would be like, haha, I'm going to prove that model wrong by creating another kind of incredible game that's creative and different and would break that mold, right? That's the joy of creativity. As soon as there are rules, we'll go ahead and break them. However, I do must say, the Quantic Foundry model seems very thorough. But even stuff like the Bartle types from the 1980s or when they were written, it still seems like a decent tool. What are they for, those things, though? There is no answer for what makes a good game in those player types. Right? You can't study them. You can't hold them up to the light and find the next, Fortnite or Angry Birds in that list of player motivations. In my view, what they're useful for is for making sure that we don't compartmentalize our player into just one of those boxes and be like, all of our players are like this. Well, no, let's remind ourselves. Let's just take a deep breath for a second. There's this whole breadth of people that want different kinds of experience. And so we can broaden the kind of player experience we're looking for, maybe even categorize our players against them so we can target growth, or we can add new features or serve a broader audience or whatever, or just add more dynamism to the game. We can justify that by and structure that by thinking about these models. But also the opposite is true, that if we're trying to make a game for everyone, it's very unlikely to succeed, right? Because it tends to be the case that if you're making for everyone, you're making for no one. In my experience, that's true. Unless you can argue for who your player is, some traits of them, something that you know that they love, and not just, oh, all these people will love it, then you're making something for no one. And so, as well as expanding these persona, these motivation models can also contract. They can say this person, but none of those people, is something that we're making this product for. Now, this is like high design philosophy, which is a little bit outside of the realm of research, but I have to come at these projects and products with at least a thesis of how we should think about players before we start speaking to players. And so this is a little bit of a peek behind the scenes about how we might work in a workshop or something like that to broaden a team's perspective of who their players might be, or broaden or shrink their perspective, depending on the nature of the problems that they face.
Yeah. That's a very nice answer, because I was like hoping this would guide us to the chat portion of the Fireside Chat and less of an interview. Because I, as a UX designer, have worked with player motivation models very much in that way. When we started designing a game, we actually had a workshop where we talked about, okay, well, these are the like Quantic Foundry's 6 different player types. Mm-hmm. Who do you think we're making this game for, and why? And then I forced the team to pick 2 out of all the 6 of them, and everyone said, "Oh, we're making this for everyone. Everyone loves this game series. It's fine." I'm like, "Okay, cool, but which 2?" Mm-hmm. And they were all very shocked that they picked the same 2, because they thought, well, if this is for everyone, shouldn't you like vary a little bit more in your answer? And then we sort of started drilling down, creating a very, very stereotypical version of, okay, this sort of player type, if they like fighting, what do they like? And they went very, very stereotypical. They started saying like they play at least 17 hours a day, drink Red Bull all the time, like very specific, which was very fun, because I'm like, okay, we went very deep. Let's scale back. Like, what of these are our assumptions of the player? And what do we like, what can we throw out as like, well, this assumption, like if they drink Red Bull or not, doesn't really matter when we're designing this game. But this other assumption of like, well, they want to have a fight every 5 minutes or something, or they will quit the game. This is something that we should probably check, because this will affect the pacing of the game. Yeah. So it's very nice to hear that you are doing something similar when you're coming in, of like sort of setting the stage and understanding the context and the mental, the headspace where the designers are doing this.
Well, yeah, it's a great approach that you took there, because in that moment, all of the team were generating hypotheses, right? They were making arguments or guesses that we could measure the outcomes from. We could speak to real people and validate whether those things were true, whether they do really drink 17 Red Bulls a day, whatever it was, right? Or something. So, there's a little bit of signal versus noise there, right? But rather than in other creative conversations, we could be having, in other boardrooms, in other teams, they will be having much more ethereal, sort of intangible conversations about, what color it should be, pink or blue, right? Where it's the role of a UX researcher or a UXer in general to try and keep the team honest and trying to keep things, on track and measurable, so that we can control and measure whether we're being successful over time. So that, if it actually isn't landing, if our 17 a day Red Bull a day player isn't getting to a match within 5 minutes, or there's some other, measurable hypothesis of being measured as incorrect, then that lets us be deliberate about what the decisions we make and how we react to that, right? Which is a very different and not inherently natural or organic outcome of these boardroom decisions about how the game should be designed, right? It's very easy for those to just spin off into, much more sort of creative and enjoyable, ethereal conversations about play or players. So yeah, that is, as much as anything, the role of a UXer in games, is to just try and be a little bit, I don't want to say the sensible person, that seems derogatory, but like just the person that's keeping the team honest and writing down all the hypotheses as they're made, so that we can genuinely keep a track as to whether or not we're making the thing better and we're making the thing we intend to make.
Yeah. And that's very important to like write things down, because the highlight of that entire workshop was that people were actually saying for the first time what they assume that the player likes. And there were some heated debates of like, oh, but our players don't do this. And then someone else said that, oh, but they do this all the time. Like, this is literally why we're doing this game, because they want to do this. And these sort of conversations are not necessarily had. And this is just one tool to help
Yeah.
people have those discussions. Obviously, there are different models you can use or different tools to spark conversations, but this is just one.
And in that case, you were um, creatively agnostic, which is not actually that, I would say, not particularly common necessarily in the boardroom, to have someone that has genuinely brings no creativity to the party, but is just trying to be the moderator, the ambassador, either the ambassador for the player or just the voice of sense in the room. And that's a very different role to everybody else who's largely is in the room because they've got incredible ideas or have had lots of success with making decisions in the past. That's a very different role to, I'm going to moderate this discussion and be impartial, but I'm going to try and hold you to the things and hold you to account for the things that you say here.
Yeah, that's very true. And that actually brings me to one other question that I just made up. But as a UXer, and I've been in-house, like full-time UXer in a company, but I was sort of an internal consultant. So I was jumping between projects of, hey, I'm helping you out here, and this is my main project. So I'm doing a lot of work here, and then kind of checking in on the others and so on and so forth. And also by choice, staying sort of aloof of like, this is not my baby, this is your baby, and I'm helping you deliver it to the world. It was sometimes quite lonely.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like, well, am I part of this team or not? Because everyone like focuses on this one game, their full attention for years, whereas I'm sort of looking at you, giving your full attention, and then jumping out to give this other team some of my attention. And you are working at an agency,
Yeah.
so you like that's even more pronounced to you. So the question is, do you consider yourself a game maker or a game developer? How would you call yourself?
Okay. Super question. Um, Firstly, to your point on feeling disconnected, yeah, I think so. Look, it's an incredible job, right? So I'm not going to sit here and boohoo woe is me. Like, it's an incredible privilege to be in the boardroom for in amongst the discussion, not even just a fly on the wall, but a participant and trusted with some of the most prominent intellectual properties on the planet, right? These are beloved brands, beloved games, trusted, extraordinary titles, and so to be part of that is extraordinary. And in any contribution, really, but to be a trusted voice in that room is extraordinary. So I'm certainly not going to pretend this is I have it hard. Let's say. Um, on game developer versus not, look, there's a lot of unnecessary and outside of this conversation gatekeeping about who is a developer and who should consider themselves not.
Didn't mean it that way.
No, but let's just say if you've helped make a game, you are a game developer and don't consider yourself to be anything less. Anyone that is not, anyone that would try and argue for that user researchers aren't game developers has no idea how games are made and have literally no idea what the politics that go into the making of a video game. It's not just about code, it's about the machine that builds the games. And that's the machine is where user research comes in. Right? No, we're not writing code, we're not drawing pictures, we're not performing, voice or acting. But we are nonetheless helping turn this machine, right? Turn and oil the gears of this machine that can make incredible products. And actually, we can make far better games with our involvement than we can without. So to try and, this is a straw man here, of course, but to try and to dismiss that is folly. But I mean, yes, funnily enough, weirdly, I also consider myself a creative. Like, there is absolutely creativity in the process of designing a piece of research that can answer a team's questions in a way that they will believe and action and answer and respond to well. Right? It's absolutely a creative act. It's not quite the same as drawing beautiful characters or 3D or whatever else in quite the same way that a game artist, for example, would describe their creativity. But I get up in the morning and I problem solve and I am creative to try and bring teams the data they need, that they can trust and believe in, and that they're inspired by to move their game forward. So yeah, I'll grow on game developer to also say there's a creativity to it as well.
Very much so. And on both sides of like, okay, you're given a question, or first of all, you need to get the question, sometimes dig it from the team,
Yeah.
then figure out the way to get the data from the players, and then find a way to deliver that in a way that lands and has an effect on the team.
Yeah, huge. Yeah, we've talked a little bit about methods, there being sort of pre-structured ways to answer these research questions, but they only get you so far. A survey means 10 things to 10 people. Building a team's trust and as I was saying, being part of a machine that can deliver them data that they'll really listen to. yeah, it's a privilege, honestly.
Yep. And me having a secret and dark background in programming, that's also very creative because in a similar way of like, well, you don't see any cool pictures,
Yeah.
but yeah. Do you have a question actually? Yeah. We have time for unfortunately only one question, but yeah.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you deliver data to a team so that they understand it and buy it?
Nice.
Um, oh, it's such an elaborate one. I'll try not to go on forever. Um, the truth is, even though there are methods, which is to say, like pre-formulated, universally relatively standard approaches, right? Usability playtest, experiential playtest. If you read the Games User Research book, there's about 26 of those methods that have been relatively formalized over the last 30 years. But there is some value inherent to that. That just we're doing the normal thing, right? I'm getting an X-ray, I'm getting an MRI, I'm getting a normal kind of test, right? That in a medical sense, you would there's some normality, and so game devs just don't want to be abnormal. They just want to buy the normal answer, right? They just want the medication for their illness in some ways. But the trust piece, right? The trust gap between who the hell are you to tell me what to do, or who the hell is this agency to come in here and tell us, or are you the right agency amongst a dozen that could maybe answer these questions? And honestly, that's it's reputational. It's building player research's brand, having a genuine influence, capturing it, and encouraging our clients to talk about it publicly. It's also absolute relentless pursuit of excellence. Right, we don't do anything. We don't put anything out of the doors that we wouldn't put our name on. So being really robust in the projects we say yes and no to. Yeah, I mean, I could go on. It's a lot of it about politics and trust, rather than just making a big promise about. There's nothing about tech. There's no technologies, no AI here. It's about trustworthiness and sort of the brand of the answers that you're promising, I think. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for the question. And there will be a break very, very soon. So you can all crowd Seb and ask all of your questions from him then. But to close up, if you had to give one piece of advice in 7 words or less to our audience, just to limit you so you don't talk forever,
Yeah, good luck with that.
go ahead.
A piece of advice for what? For games user for games user research in general, for executing games user research?
Whichever.
Okay. Find people that don't love you. Playtest. That was rubbish.
Good enough. You stuck to the limit. Thank you.